we would be focusing on navigating psychological challenges. A lot of things are going on in the country, a lot of things that are triggering sides of us as a people that is becoming very, very alarming in the way that we react to the situation, in the way that we react in social circles, in the way that we behave to our family members. A lot of families are now getting disconnected, and all of this can be traced down to the way we're handling the impact of some of the issues that surround us as a people, especially because of the peculiarity of our situation in Africa, or more specifically in Nigeria at this time. And of course, it's important that we highlight these challenges, talk about the impact that it has on us emotionally, psychologically, even physiologically as well. And then of course, at the end of the day, maybe even tutor us on how to best manage our, for lack of an idea of how to better cater to their one who is a psychologist, who is also a therapist, as the situation of exhaust all of the problem. They could be joining me today virtually in this from New York individuals towards mental wellness on board and kickstart.
Thank you so much for having me.
By explaining the concept of mental health, first of all, especially with a lot of emphasis on how we perceive the subject in this part of the world. Give us like an overview of mental health and the unfortunate disregard that we have for it as a people in this part of the world.
Yeah, so like mental health refers to a person's emotional, psychological, and social state or well-being, right? And I know that when we think of mental health in Nigeria, we think of mental illness immediately, right? But everybody has mental health, right? Now, the level of mental health you have, whether it's taken to the negative or the positive, like you have in like a mental state that you're at, right? It encompasses how we think, how we feel, how we behave, how we cope with stress, how we relate to other people, how we make choices. Really, it cuts across virtually all aspects of our lives, right? And I know that like in Nigeria, we have a lot of like negative views towards mental health. People ask someone, oh, how's your mental health? And I'm fine, I'm perfectly fine, like there's nothing wrong with me. They don't think about the fact that maybe they're stressed out, and they've been stressed out for a very long time, or maybe they're anxious, or maybe they're sad, or depressed, you know, those things will come to them. When people think about mental health, when you think about, they immediately think about severe mental illnesses, right? You think about someone like tearing up their foot on the street and like, you know, walking into it or something like that. And obviously we need to have a healthy understanding of what mental health is. Like in mental state, where you act mentally at each point, that is your mental health. Like how you think, how you interact with people, how you relate with people, how you make decisions, how you view the world a lot of times also encompassing our mental health.
Right. Just like you highlighted, a lot of people seem to use mental health and mental illness interchangeably, and these are two very different concepts. Mental health basically encompasses your social interaction. For example, your place in the family, how well you're able to handle certain situations, your reaction to certain situations, amongst other things. And now it can vary. You can either have good mental health, or you can of course have a failing mental health, and that's what leads to mental illness. So in discussing mental illnesses, let's actually differentiate by illustration. Let's talk about mental illness, what it is, and also maybe highlight certain common mental illnesses that people experience, that they're even in denial, that they refuse to admit that they're suffering from.
So mental illnesses are typically like the mental health disorders that like affect our mood, thinking, behavior, right? And when we talk about mental illnesses, there's a variety of mental illnesses existing. Of course, the most common ones are anxiety and depression. That's one that's the most common globally. But we have other mental health conditions like psychotic disorder, which is the one that people see on the road, or people who have lost anything touching reality. So we have psychotic disorders. We also have mood disorders like bipolar disorders, depression. We have personality disorders. We have eating disorders. We have substance disorders. Like a lot. We have so many mental illnesses and mental disorders. Like and I know that people aren't necessarily aware of a lot of them because like we focus a lot on severe mental illnesses, right? Someone who's struggling from excessive stress, someone who is struggling with anxiety, who is struggling with depression. Those are mental illnesses. Like someone, and people might disregard that, like I'm just a little sad, it's fine, or I feel anxious, everybody feels anxious, it's fine. But then typically, how do we determine if something is a mental illness? We really think about it from something like how destructive is it in your life? How is it affecting your day-to-day activities? Right? If you're really anxious and it affects how you interact with people, it affects how you go about doing your job, it affects how you exist, right? We start to have the conversation is like, obviously there's a problem there, right? There's depression. If you're struggling with self-care, you're struggling to do things that you previously used to enjoy, right? Or with stress, it's affecting how you engage with your work, you're aloof, you're numb, like those things are what we consider a problem, right? Now, obviously, we have the DSM diagnostic manual that helps us to give like specific diagnosis, but for the most part, like having any emotional, psychological, or behavioral challenges can be considered like a mental disorder, mental illness.
Right. Thank you very much. I want us to talk about mental health struggles and gender. I know that we're talking about navigating psychological challenges, but then if we do not separate these things, if we do not address the foundation and not understand the problem, it might be difficult for us to prefer solutions that make sense to the ordinary or average Nigerian. So I want us to highlight the relationship between mental health struggles and gender, because it would seem like specific mental illnesses are common among specific genders. And this is me, I'm not trying to say that it's only certain individuals or certain demographic that suffer from mental illnesses. It's just there is a variance in the amount of people that are affected by this mental health illnesses, and there's some sort of gender disparity. You see some very common in men, maybe because of societal pressure and the idea of what a man is supposed to be like. You see certain mental health illnesses are more common amongst women because they're trying to satisfy some sort of traditional belief, amongst other things. So help us to find that variance. What are some of the common mental health illnesses that affect certain individuals based on their gender, and what do you think are some of the common triggers to these mental health illnesses?
Okay, so I would say that this is just a global issue. Mental health research has for a long time been focused on that, right? So we still have a lot of knowledge gap in terms of like how mental illnesses, and all this stuff in surgery, but like how mental illnesses affect them. But for now, we know that mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, and traumatic stress related disorders are typically women are more likely to have depression, anxiety, traumatic stress disorder. I think that also gender also affects how women say when we talk about their mental health issue, right? And how women react to pick up. For instance, with depression, for instance, we know that like a lot of masculinity causes people to want to like keep all that stuff to themselves, right? So they're less likely to seek for help. So that also affects research and how to report this research, right? So it's like society and the traditional ways that it takes on men and women can affect how mental illness is also expressing itself, right? So women are more likely to have anxiety, they're more likely, sometimes they're more likely to be more vocal about their struggles than women.
All right, thank you very much. For those of you who are probably just joining this conversation and you're wondering what we're speaking about, we're talking about navigating psychological challenges. I am speaking with Ololade Oketunbi, who is a psychologist and a therapist. If you allow me to summarize, of course, she has a more extensive portfolio, which I would reel out before the end of the program, but just understand that she's very well versed when it comes to matters of psychology, and she actually has a master's in social work from the New New York University as a licensed master social worker, and of course she has been practicing as a therapist, guiding individuals towards mental wellness and recovery. We are going to get to the recovery aspect of this conversation, but like I said earlier at the start of the program, we have to understand very deeply what the problem is, so that in preferring solution we're addressing all of the things that are responsible for the problem in the first place, and nip this at the bud. So we have had conversations about our understanding of mental health and mental illnesses, the difference, and also the relationship between both concepts. We've spoken about mental health illnesses and how gender is a factor to consider in analyzing this, and also as some of the triggers. It could be societal pressure, it could be trying to keep up with sort of a traditional trend or what have you, amongst other things. So Olorade, let's talk about common myths and misconception about mental health illnesses. For example, you've in a way addressed it when you use the example of men and the fact that they believe it's not okay for them to discuss when they're struggling because of masculinity. They're supposed to be the big bad wolf, the protector, the provider. They're not supposed to have moments where they break down, a notion that society has promulgated for decades and decades on end. So let's talk about common myths and misconceptions about mental health illnesses and the long-term repercussion that is going to have on the individual, their immediate family, and the society at large.
So when it comes to mental health myths and misconceptions, so what I've heard is, mental physical violence. Right? So if someone is violent, if someone is violent, they can be mentally ill, which is not true. Actually, in reality, people who are mentally ill are more susceptible to violence than the other way around. So they're more susceptible to being harmed than they are to harm people. Then we have things like children who experience mental health issues, like mental health issues are an adult thing, which is not true. There are a lot of mental health issues that affect children, and it's important that we're able to catch them early so that they can have a better quality of life as adults. There's also the idea of mental health issues can affect you. I don't have any mental health, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm fine, which isn't true. Everyone will choose on the mental health spectrum at different points in their life, and your experiences can impact your mental health at each point. You might be stressed out, and people will go a big deal, stress is fine, like, maybe not. And so those are things that people think about. People also don't know that mental health issues are more common than they actually are. So you think of mental health, you just see people that have mental health issues, that's fine, even if it's fine, but that's not true. There are a lot of people who are struggling with mental health issues in the world because there's no awareness. Like, you have to know there's a problem to be able to address the problem. You have to know there's a problem to be able to even report it and say, okay, these are the amount of people that actually have this problem. But because there's lack of awareness, or people are not aware that it's actually more common than people think it is. And some other mental health I would say is that in Nigeria, speaking of Nigeria, is like this spiritual, like the devil, and we need to pray it away. I think that a mental health myth that we have in Nigeria sometimes. And I would like to say that most people, reaction towards regular health care. People are more open to going to the doctor to see what the doctor has to say. When it comes to mental health care, people have a much hostile feeling towards it, and most of it as we need to capacity, we need to go away. People with mental health issues also deserve to have access to mental health care.
All right. Thank you very much for explaining that. And the one that I really want us to that I paid a lot of attention to, and I hope our listeners did, is the fact that not everybody that has a mental health illness is on the street playing in dirt or roaming the streets. That's more or less a psychotic break. It's just a part of mental health illness. A more severe manifestation of a mental health illness. It's not everyone who has a mental health illness that is on the road pushing tires or picking trash on the street. There are people who are very quiet, who you're working with at the office, who are functioning. There are people who are depressed and they function optimally. They do their job almost perfectly, but they are going through severe depression and you have absolutely no idea. The funniest person in the room can be the most depressed person in the room. So this is why we're bringing this conversation to radio. By the way, we're streaming the program live on Facebook. So for those of you who do not have your radio with you right now, as long as you have access to the internet, you can go to our Facebook platform, facebook.com/mainland 98.3 FM. You can watch us live in the studio, participate on the program. As a matter of fact, you can drop your contributions using the live chat option. You can send messages as we're conducting the program live, and I would read whatever messages or questions that you have regarding the topic live on air. So go to our Facebook platform where we're streaming right now, facebook.com/mainland 98.3 FM, or you could join us live. My name is Sage Babalola. I'm talking with Ololade Oketunbi, who is a psychologist and also a therapist, and we are discussing navigating psychological challenges. All right, you mentioned, for example, some of the common myths and misconceptions about mental health illnesses, that it's an adult thing. Children do not go through mental health illnesses, and I want us to focus on that, and I want us to talk about this with reference to the family structure, the typical family structure in Nigeria, for example. And I'm using Nigeria because, well, proximity, I can relate to the average Nigerian family. For example, expectations of parents when it comes to the performance of their children, whether it be academically, the comparison among peers. Mommy Tunde's son is a doctor, you want to study music. This person is 25 years old, he bought a car for his mother, you're still living with me. The person who's first position in class, do they have two heads? And I very well understand that this is from a place of love, but I want you to explain to us some of the repercussions that these things have, especially in a family structure. It's the smallest unit of society, and most individuals, whatever opinions, ideologies, their behaviors is, if you trace it, you will see that it is more or less a result of the kind of family that they came out from. So talk to us about how expectations of children, comparison, the behavior of their parents or their guardians or those around them in a way contribute to the possibility of them suffering from a mental health issue.
I think that, within family, the family structure, this is something I was even thinking about. Within the family structure, people tend to disregard children's feelings, right? And they see children as an extension of themselves rather than individuals themselves. And so when, especially even with learning disability, this is beyond comparison. With learning disability, people often do not want their children to have any struggles, right? Because they see a child that is succeeding and like, why can't you be like them? Disregarding that their child might have a learning disability or have something that they're struggle with. I think that parents have high expectations, but they're not willing to provide their children with the necessary emotional support that they need to be, fully functioning adults or fully functioning, I'm going to use myself as an example, right? I have ADHD, and I know growing up I struggled a lot with school and facing still, and obviously there's all the labels that they use, this child is lazy, or this child is too, troublesome, or they just don't want to, sit still and read. Or I struggled in childhood, and I thought I just want to try hard enough, I just need to try harder, but that was not the case. And I think that if I had access to someone to explain that it's not your fault, but these are strictness strategies and these are ways that you can navigate, having this disability or moving on in life and doing better, right? I have to figure that all on my own. And I think that if parents are more aware of the challenges that children are susceptible to, that can be very helpful in picking them up early and providing them the necessary support that they need to have a better quality of life. And this also, extends into schools. Our schools equipped to the proper tools to be able to identify these things in children, rather than just beating them or punishing them or berating them. Are they equipped enough to be able to identify that this child is struggling, and how can we help this child? How can we provide the necessary emotional, psychological, and educational support for them to thrive?
Well, thank you very much. I really hope that parents are listening to this. The child that you think is a dullard is probably suffering from a learning disability. They might be dyslexic. You don't know that because you're not informed. And then there's no amount of chastising, of beating, of grounding, of punishment, of food deprivation that's going to cause that child to learn. They just simply do not have the ability to, because they are suffering from a learning disability that you have no idea about. And I want that to usher us into the conversation of drug abuse. We have our newspaper analysis that we do on radio every morning, and the papers this morning reported that there are young people who have resorted to using feces as a form of high. I literally mean feces as a form of high. They use gum because apparently drugs are now getting more expensive, so they have to come up with creative ways to get some sort of high to escape reality. And unfortunately, the demographic, the age bracket continue to expand from as young as 15 years old to as old as 64-year-olds are abusing drugs severely in Nigeria. And this is supposed to be the population that should gear us towards national success, because for every nation to thrive, you have to have a teeming youth population. And if our youth population that's supposed to be teeming are busy abusing drugs and are not even able to function within a small society, how do we even expect them to have any national benefit to us? Talk to us about the prevalence of drug abuse at this time and how it might be related to their inability to properly deal with the psychological challenges that they're battling with.
Yes, I think that we definitely have a drug use problem in Nigeria, and this is what I was really thinking about. I was thinking about the fact that substance abuse or certain addiction is a very complex psychological issue, right? There's so many factors that contribute to someone having a substance addiction or someone being dependent on substances. I think the factor that we don't take into consideration much is that there's not enough mental health services for people to access when they're struggling. And so people would, like I said, we try to escape reality. And I think that a lot of the way that we address substance use problem in Nigeria is more so from a fear-mongering perspective, right? It's like, oh my God, don't overdo that. We need to equip people with enough information of, if you engage in substances, what are the things that you can expect? What are the things that would happen, and how can we seek help? It's something we call harm reduction. It's providing people with enough tools to help themselves. Because, again, we're in a recession. Everybody is struggling in one way or the other, and it's also affecting the children. The children are not, and the youth are not exempt from the current economical and social problems that we're having in the country. So we need to invest in providing them with access to mental health services, or ways that they can build better coping mechanisms, right? Especially, and also that in Nigeria, we don't necessarily teach people how to have better coping mechanisms. We just expect people to toughen up and move on, right? If you're not able to toughen up, you're still weak, right? You're just okay, everybody's sad, move on. Everybody's struggling, move on. I think that I know that we feel by all persons, we find out that when people start to talk about their struggles, just everybody's suffering, please move on. So people need something as a struggle, right? And it's not just substance people are addicted to drugs, into so many people. We have an addiction problem, right? And it's something that obviously we need to address in society.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you very much. I don't know if you're aware, but April actually is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. It's a month that is dedicated to sexual assault awareness, to speak or help survivors, also speak to those who are around survivors on the things to say, the things to not say, things that can act as triggers, basically to inform people on how to act around those who are survivors, who are victims of sexual assault. And I want to talk about us here in Africa, and please forgive me that I keep making Africa and Nigeria the center of this conversation. Again, like I said, proximity is important. I might have an idea of what the culture is like outside the country, but I don't live there. I live here in Nigeria. We all live here in Nigeria, so we can relate more to Africa and Nigeria. Talk about sexual assault. I mean, you're a therapist, and you very well be able to affirm that there are people who have developed severe mental illness illnesses as a result of their experience with sexual assault. And unfortunately, we live in a community where the victim is silenced, and if not silenced, the victim is shamed. Rather than cater to the needs of a victim of sexual assault, the questions we're asking: what were you wearing? Why were you out at night alone? Why were you alone with a group of men or a group of women, regardless of who was assaulted? Because assault is not just a female specific thing, men get assaulted as well. We ask questions that are a tad bit irrelevant in that moment rather than cater to the victims. And unfortunately, there are statistics to prove that most people who get assaulted are assaulted by family members, friends, people that they trusted. And instead of us to speak about this, we say it is a family secret. Do you want people to know that your uncle assaulted you? You have to be quiet. You can't bring shame to the family. And there you have a child or an adult, regardless, who is depressed, who is silenced, who probably will go into drug abuse to numb the pain, amongst other things. So talk to us about this culture of victim shaming and victim silencing and the role it plays in the psychological challenges that a lot of people deal with at this time.
Yes, I think that the sexual assault is a very sensitive topic, and I know that for a fact. I know for a fact that the victims, they have to they typically suffer from PTSD, depression, suicidality, self-harm. These are things that will result from having experienced that. But I think more importantly is being even exposed to that, and also, like you said, being discreet. Not being able to share their story. But I know there's a lot of non-profit organizations that are helping women to work out their story now. I think there's also a policy issue as to how rape and sexual assault are treated within our society. Even with our laws, they're not strict enough when it comes to things like that. So if the laws were stricter, it would be beyond people just say, oh, what are you wearing? It would be people need to get justice. Right? It's people want to be held out, but they also need justice. And I think that lack of justice within our society exacerbates the psychological turmoil that a victim might experience. Right? It's it's one thing to get abused and not be able to talk about it. It's also another to see your abuser, just living in the society and being interacted with properly and being treated like you. While you are struggling, while you are suffering. Right? And I think we have a culture of silence in Nigeria where we want to keep everything on the hush hush tone because it's seen as as a dent on the family name or as an insult. Right? Women are more punished severely for situations like that when they're not getting victims. So I definitely think that we have a policy issue, we have a law issue. We also have an awareness issue. Obviously, there's a lot of that is because in the studio, like I said. But we have a long way to go when it comes to providing people who have experienced sexual assault with appropriate tools and also getting them justice. That's very important.
All right, thank you very much. Now let's talk about psychological challenges as a primary contributor to self-harm and the rising amount of suicides that we have in the country. Last year, it was something like a trend. At some point, I was confused as much as I was concerned. People were jumping into the lagoon. It had to get to a point where we had to start monitoring the lagoons for people who might attempt to jump over the bridge. People were ingesting deadly substances and leaving letters for their loved ones, maybe academic stress. It was a lot of people were just taking their own lives, self-harming, cutting themselves, starving themselves. It was a lot of things that was happening with regards to self-harm. And self-harm doesn't just mean suicide. Self-harm, starving yourself is part of it, or punishing yourself or depriving yourself basic things because you think you don't deserve it. Some people go as far as punishing themselves. We have people who flog themselves. There's this practice that they do. They cut themselves. It's a lot of things that we really, if we get into it, it's just, I don't know if we can accommodate that conversation properly on radio. So talk about psychological challenges as a contributor, a major contributor to the practice of self-harm and even the amount of suicides that we're seeing in this present day world.
Okay, so I want to start by saying that people's mental health and psychological state is heavily influenced by the environment. I think that within Nigeria and our environment, there's a lot of economic bad. And when there was the COVID and the same thing that happened, within our society, that has led to the deterioration of people's mental health. Right? right? So like when we talk about psychological effects that lead to someone like self-harming or someone committing suicide, we need to also talk about the environmental factors that affect people's psychological state. Right? We have a lot of psychosocial needs, a lot of people are struggling, a lot of people do not have the need to take care of their physiological needs, right? And if you know, there's something called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where people need to take care of their physiological needs before anything else. People need to feel secure, they need to feel safe. There's so many things that are important to ensuring someone has a great mental health, or they have a great mental health. And all of these communities or social media are not available to Nigerians, right? So what that means is that our mental health is influenced by our environment, it is influenced by the people that we live with. And I think that like our society isn't one that necessarily promotes good mental health. And people cannot, if we don't have preventative measures, and recovery and curative measures are also like 40, right? So if let's say someone don't develop a psychological problem, they can't find help. They can't accept help. So if we also we can't prevent, and we also can barely scratching the surface of helping people recover or helping people with treatment. So I think that like the psychological state here affects suicidality as well as self-harm, but we also need to take into consideration the environmental factors that cause things like that.
Right. All right. Well, again, if you're just joining us, this is a conversation on psychological challenges and how to navigate these challenges. I'm talking to Ololade Oketunbi, and together we have been talking quite extensively about mental health challenges in the country, the environmental factors, the factor or the considerations of even the family setting. We spoke about the different kinds of mental health conditions or mental illnesses, also the difference between mental health and mental illnesses, amongst other things. We spoke briefly about how culture, tradition, expectations of gender can also be factors in psychological challenges, myths and misconceptions about mental health or psychological health as well. I want us to, as we slowly wind down the conversation, talk about how there is an inaccessibility to health care when it comes to taking care of those who suffer from mental illnesses. Just like you said, when you have malaria, typhoid, or whatever the case may be, you're at the hospital, but a person, is exhibiting symptoms of depression, we think the best thing to do is to isolate them or take them to some sort of religious house for cleansing or whatever the case may be. A person is having PTSD and we tell them to thug it out, forgive the informality of my language. You're a man, your man doesn't cry, you shouldn't break down, just don't tell anybody. There's an entire thread on X right now, formerly Twitter, where men are advising other men to never open up to their partner because it's going to cause them to be disrespected in their marriage, which is ridiculous because these are 20-year-olds, 24-year-olds who barely understand what life is all about. So what do you mean by that? Don't tell a woman, just thug it out, all you have to do is make money. And that is why we have, because I did go through the statistics of people who commit suicide. Unfortunately, we have more men committing suicide than women at this time, and these are men who are to a large extent financially comfortable, so they have all the money that they might need, but they still had no peace within themselves. So let's talk about how there's no access to healthcare. How many therapists, how many psychologists do we have in the country? Well, do we even regard the practice of psychology in the country? Talk to us about that.
So honestly, we have a dearth of mental health professionals. We simply do not have enough mental health professionals to serve the amount of people, of Nigerians that we have in Nigeria. The WHO says that we have about 20% of Nigerians who are, now 40 million people who are affected by mental illnesses, right? Well, how many people have 200 psychiatrists in Nigeria also, which is as it now for the amount of people that we have suffering from mental health
200 million people, right? In the country.
Exactly. Right, so 200 psychiatrists, that's simply not enough. Also, we do not have enough mental health facilities. I think about it from the fact of especially in Lagos, and I say Lagos because Lagos is the most heavily populated place in Nigeria. I like to, because when I was in New York, and I like to compare it to New York because I would say New York also being the majority of America's population, right? So the big city and hub. Like, we had a lot of mental health facilities. Just like you have general hospitals that are, close to your house, they had mental health facilities that were accessible to people, right? So we need to get to the point where accessing mental health care is as simple as walking into the general hospital or near your home, like the local general hospital. We need to get to that point. We simply do not have enough accessibility to mental health services in the country. And even with like the amount of mental health professionals that we have, is like we simply cannot handle all of these cases. We need more mental health professionals. We need more mental health facilities so that like we can increase people's accessibility to these services.
Aside from the paucity of services when it comes to psychologists and therapists in the country, obviously that's a sector that we need to really put funds in and encourage people to, throw the part of seeking help when they have issues. There's also the problem of therapy hesitancy in Nigeria, which is why I gave that illustration where we tell people, why would you go and sit on the couch of a stranger and tell them why you let your life fall apart? Why would you go and cry in the office of some stranger? Pay money for somebody to listen to you. It's ridiculous. And unfortunately, this is an idea that has been entrenched in the minds of a lot of Nigerians. Like, why would I go and why would I pay somebody to listen to me? Why would I do that? So there's some sort of therapy hesitancy in Nigeria. What do you think is responsible for this, and how do we abolish that notion in the mind, of the general populace?
I think first of all, I think people have a poor understanding of what therapy is and can benefit from therapy. Therapy isn't just for people with severe mental illnesses, right? That's not what it is for. Therapy can be used with people that have emotional and psychological behavioral challenges. So it can also be helpful to people seeking personal growth and self-awareness. Therapy can be helpful for anyone, actually. And I think that people have this idea, people see any mental health service, they see it as a last resort. And obviously we need to change that. People need to see mental health care therapy as a first line of service, right? People have, I think it just goes down to stigma. That's what I think it is. The stigma around mental health, the stigma around, if I go to other places, like if I tell someone I'm this place, I think, you mad, like, what's going on, like, everything okay, like, I'm like, yeah, I want to know more about myself. I want to explore myself, my attachment style, how I interact with people, my relationships. Like, just talk to your friend. That is not help. Like, it's just like saying that, I have all these symptoms I'm having physically, and say just talk to your friend. So you advise the person to go to a doctor. So why is it different therapy? Is that in this conception of what therapy is, who can benefit from therapy? Again, as the stigma that surrounds just mental health and mental illness as a whole, it seeps into like people's ideas. If I go to therapy, does that actually mean I have to acknowledge that I'm mad? And like that internalized stigma, like, I'm mad now. That's what it is. Like, I'm mad. And that's not true, right? You can go to you can see a therapist without classifying yourself as mad or like psychotic, and that's what it is. So yeah.
So prevention is definitely better than cure, right? As much as like we've said, we don't even have enough individuals to help us rise the number of individuals who suffer from psychological issues. So what are some of the necessary lifestyle practices you think we can incorporate into our daily life to at least help manage or minimize a person's susceptibility from suffering from mental health illnesses? Or what is even the best way to preserve our mental health? What practices do you think we should imbibe for us to preserve our mental health, and in the event that we actually have these mental health issues, is able to help us minimize the symptoms that we exhibit?
I think the most important thing is awareness. First of all, people need to understand what mental illness is. The symptoms that define mental illness. So they're able to identify these things. And when you're able to identify things earlier on, for instance, being able to identify depression early on is much better than, when it has progressed to the point where someone is attempting to, kill themselves. So we need to be aware. Like, I think there's also, in terms of preventative measures, we have to focus on children, right? that there needs to be like an ongoing process of like in school, with parents, awareness, being able to identify mental health symptoms early on, like early detection. Early detection is very important. Also, like when we talk about like preserving our mental health, we need to be average Nigerian does not have access to social media. The average Nigerian thinks that stress, prolonged stress is okay, which is not. The country is stressful here, so we need to find a way to distress. Stressing out all the time is not a good thing. It can lead to other physical problems, mental health problems. So we need to be able to unwind. We need to be able to like take a break and say, okay, I can see that my mental health is deteriorating, and I need to do something about that. But you can't see if your mental health is deteriorating if you're not aware of what constitutes deteriorating mental health and how be able to identify it, so that you'll be able to make the necessary changes that you need to live like a better life.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because in Nigeria it's like stress is a flex. I work 20 hours a day. It's not a flex. It doesn't make you better than anyone else. Oh, I don't sleep. I only sleep 2 hours a day, and I come to work and it's not a flex. It's at all not a flex.
I have 7 jobs.
Yeah, I have 7 jobs. I work 9 jobs. Sleep is not necessary. It is. It's not the flex that you think that it is. Only in this part of the world that people brag with how much they stress themselves, which with sleep deprivation. I've never seen it in my life where people brag with sleep deprivation. Stress in itself can even cause the release of the hormone cortisol, and we know that the excessive presence of cortisol we know what it can cause. It can even in a way open the portal to even certain cardiac illnesses. So it's not a flex that you're stressed, that you're working excessively, that you're not sleeping. It doesn't make you better than anyone else. Every chance that you can. That is why it's good to have a timetable where you're able to do all of your important tasks, and then you dedicate time to sleep. Stay away from your phone for a few hours, close your eyes, catch some sleep. It will even help you perform better in whatever field that you're in. So before we round off this conversation, or let us round off this conversation by talking about the role of society in encouraging and embracing mental health care. We are social creatures. That's just how we are. We thrive better in community. We thrive better when we're around people. We thrive better when we have friends and family, and we're around laughter, we're around love. That's just how we're wired as human beings. And so when you are in a society that turns its back on you when you're struggling, recovery is slower, and in some cases recovery never happens. So let's talk about society and how we as a people can help those who are struggling, and also not play a part in triggering mental illnesses in other people.
I think that we as a society need to stigma. We need to remove stigma. We also need to know how to interact with people, sharing the mental health problems with us. I think a lot of people are very dismissive. A lot of Nigerians are very dismissive of people. And like Nigerians, we try to out-problem you sometimes. When you're trying to share like a problem as to what happened to you and why you're depressed, and they make it about themselves. They're like, oh, I've gone through wars. Like, I have gone through so much wars. And, I'm fine, I'm doing better. Just, it will be okay, so I'll be fine. Like, that doesn't help, and it's like inclusive. So, the best way we can help, obviously, we're not, like, the average person does not have mental health to be giving them professional services. Is to listen and to be accepting towards their, like, towards their struggles. Right, the mental health isn't always pretty. Even just think, I'm just really quirky. That's not the case. Like, a lot of mental illnesses are not fun. They're raw and gritty. Someone is telling you, I'm depressed by having like for somebody who's in last 1 week or 2 days. That's so rough to like. That would you don't have your back. Tell you not brush your teeth. Depression is very real, and the person might be suicidal, and you're concerned about their truth. That's something like this. But we need to be more accepting. We need to understand. I think it's about awareness. People need to be aware and be able to have those conversations without being dismissive, judgmental, or perpetrating stigma.
I mean, I also want you to highlight how we also very much believe that only poor people can be depressed. And so when a rich individual, especially in such this person committed suicide, or this person is in a mental health facility receiving treatment, and then the first thought of the average person is, but they have money, they have so many cars, they're living in a mansion, they can eat anything they like, they probably have never worked a day in their life. And so what are they depressed about? I want you to talk about that, how that, I don't know where the idea came from, but why do we think, like, why does the average person think that riches means that you're automatically shielded from mental health illnesses?
I think because a lot of people consider depression as a result of having a terrible life. I think if you're depressed, you will look at a terrible life. I don't know if you have experienced, like, someone who had a really difficult life and say that they're depressed. You don't even have to be guilty. I mean, like, look, you're so ungrateful. Like, look at your life. Like, look at all the things that you have. How could you possibly be depressed? That's crazy. We need to highlight the fact that depression also has biological causes. Like, it doesn't have to be environmentally, like, it doesn't have to be an environmental cause. There's people who are genuinely, they have chemical imbalances in their brain that causes them to be depressed. It goes beyond, like, they're poor, some people are just more susceptible to mental health problems than others. There's genetic factors, there's so many things that contribute to how someone experience mental health issues. And sometimes people have comorbid mental health issues. That depression that you're seeing might be, or the suicidality might be as a result of another mental health issue that they're struggling with. Right? So it depends, and it depends on their upbringing. It's so many things that contribute to why someone would have depression. So we shouldn't, like, just chalk it up. So, like, when you have a good life, look at your car. If you're so depressed, give me your car, give me your money, then we are not going to be depressed if that happens to me. But that's not the case. Depression is not as a result of, like, of having a good or bad life. Yes, having, bad things happen to you can result in depression, but that's not the only factor, the only cause. So understanding that might be helpful for people to, redefine what depression is in their head.
Well, thank you very much. This has indeed been a very interesting, informative and educative conversation, and I can hope that somebody out there now has at least a fundamental understanding of what psychological challenges are, mental health illnesses, the role that we can play as individuals, as a family, even in the workplace, how we can assist each other. Rather than shove people to the side because they're not performing optimally, we should maybe try to investigate why they're unable to perform optimally, especially if they had a track record of being very, very good at their job and suddenly they're withdrawn, they aren't speaking anymore, they're not socializing anymore. Rather than dismiss them, we should try to find out and not say, oh, you have money, you have a job, you have a good house, so what exactly are you sad about? That's not how to respond to people who are sad. You're pushing them further away and then they feel alone, and people who are alone start to think of the worst things that they could do to themselves. So let's not contribute to the rising suicide rate or the rising amount of people that we have suffering from mental health illnesses. Thank you so very much for joining us, Ololade Oketunbi. We appreciate your insight into all of these matters. If you want to know who she is, well, I did tell you that she's very, very qualified for this conversation, as she holds a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Covenant University, a Master's in Social Work from New York University, and she is a licensed Master Social Worker. She's also had the privilege of being a practicing therapist who guides individuals towards mental health, wellness and recovery. And of course, she tries to focus a lot on destigmatizing mental health issues and helping people understand psychological challenges, how we can help and how we can get out of it as well. Once again, we appreciate your presence on the program. I look forward to having more conversations with you in the nearest future.
Thank you so much. It was really nice to spend time with you and talk about this thing. So thank you so much.
Of course. Have a beautiful day. Yes. All right. Well, that's it for this segment of Health Plus. I told you it's back-to-back conversations on different aspects of health. Earlier, we spoke about homeopathy. Now we spoke about navigating psychological challenges in the country. We referenced Nigeria and Africa a lot, but of course, we still paid attention to the way it is outside the country, so that we can juxtapose how we react to these situations of mental health illnesses or mental health in its totality. My name is Sage Babalola. we're going to go on a music break. When we come back, we're going to have Enterprises Health and Wellness Show. We're going to continue with the conversation we were having last week. We're focusing on men. We're focusing a lot on men and how they can optimize their health, how they can be healthy at the different aspect of male health. And that conversation is going to continue today with Dr. Akpabio and Marvis on Enterprises Health and Wellness Show at 11:30 to 12 noon. At 11:30, I would take the news headline, and then after Enterprises Health and Wellness Show at noon, you have the full bulletin. My name is Sage Babalola. Let's go on the short music break and then proceed straight on to Enterprises Health and Wellness Show. You're still on to Mainland 98.3 FM, the sound of Lagos. The conversation still continues. Please stay with us.
Follow us on all our social media platforms on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Mainland 98.3 FM.